请大家稍等一下，我们马上进行今天早上的第2场演讲。好，那我们准备欢迎 Eric， 另外一个 Eric。好，那我们接下来这场演讲呢，是由这个 Google 的这个工程师Eric Bidelman 来为我们讲这个关于一样是 HTML5 的一些开发上面的议题。好，那这位 Eric 先生呢，他之前在 Google 都是就是做一些产品，比方说像 Google Docs、Site， 然后 Health and 一些Data API 等等。那他目前在这个Google 的 Chrome 的 team 里头，然后并且就是向外这个传播这个 HTML5 的福音。好，所以我们可以称为他是一个福音战士。不对，是传教士。好，这个 HTML5 的传教士。好，那我想我们时间也不多了。好，那我们现在一样以热烈的掌声欢迎这个Eric Bidelman。
属性做转变，所以今天我选择了 background color with 还有 height 做转变。然后转变的过程是，第一个对象我要转变4秒，第二个对象我要转变8秒，第三个对象要转变5秒。然后我也同时设定了最后一个对象要2秒之后才开始转变，所以最后一个对象的 height 是在2秒之后转变5秒，所以它那个转变是逐渐的转变，而不是你按它就直接变到另外一个对象。OK， 我这里可以给大家做一个很简单的。是这个吗？比方说这个它的转变是所有对象，所以只要我把我的鼠标 hover 到对象，它就会从75的 pixel 的高度转变到150，而且它转变的速度只有0.3秒。
Give me 1 second.
然后同一个时候，大家也可以 set 这个 is in out 这个 function。就是怎么说呢？就你要那个转变是开始快，然后之后慢，或者是不同的选择，就它有几个选择让大家去选。所以这个很简单 ，CSS 就3行也搞定了。
That looks good. Okay, so for any of those that didn't catch that, my name is Eric Bidelman, and I work on our Google Chrome developer relations team. I specifically work on HTML5 stuff. I'm one of the contributors to the HTML5 Rocks playground and site that you saw. And I'll show you some cool stuff. We actually just had a major release, I believe yesterday or today. I don't know which time zone my body's in anymore. But today we're going to talk a little bit about what it takes to build an HTML5 application, sort of some performance techniques that you can take advantage of in sort of making the next generation of application on the web. So we'll talk about performance. I'll sort of discuss, there's some really sexy APIs in HTML5, right? There's Canvas, there's video, there's WebGL, there's all these graphical APIs that people usually demo and show. I'm going to sort of also talk about a few of those, but we'll also cover some of the lesser known APIs that you can use and some of the things that are sort of less sexy, but also very, very useful in writing web applications. We'll talk about some of the markup. HTML5 has a ton of new markup for describing semantics and the presentation and layout of a page, but there's also some markup that really relates to the way web applications are built. I'll talk a little bit about web workers and WebSockets. Michael sort of alluded to that. I might skip over some of that depending on how much time we have. Compatibility is still a huge issue, right? Because HTML5, it's getting there, but it's not quite there yet. And then some great tools and resources. So, quick performance wins. So the first tip I have for you today is do not underestimate CSS, right? CSS3 has come a long, long way. And as a web developer, right, we sort of get in this rut of developing using a library like jQuery, which is a great library, I use it all the time, for animations and rounded corners and all this stuff, box shadows and CSS masks and alpha channels. But all that is now available in CSS. And so you can offload all of that onto the rendering process of the browser. So A quick example of just an animation, right? Just by applying a class and the transition property of WebKit, Moz, and O for Opera, you can move the box, right, or whatever have you. Anything on the DOM is manipulable with CSS. So it's super, super powerful. Another tip, right? So with CSS3 3D transforms, instead of moving that using the left property, maybe we use translate 3D and move it using the X coordinate there. So just another thing to keep in mind, and that will give us hardware acceleration, which is great because that's super, super fast and it's going to look beautiful on the web. A couple other things that people don't typically remember are things like web fonts. So browsers have tried to do web fonts for a long time now, and fortunately, they're finally becoming a reality in the web, and all the browsers are supporting them. Pseudo selectors too. We'll discuss a little bit about HTML5 forms. If you've ever built a form on the web and doing validation and all that with JavaScript, it's just a huge pain. Next tip, native is always better. So again, the idea here is that we've been doing things like JSON parsing and trimming, padding off a string using libraries like jQuery and Prototype and Dojo and all these. But this stuff is now native as part of JavaScript 1.6 plus. So you can do native parsing in JSON or in Stringify and serialize data. There's selectors. So, again, it's popularized by a library like jQuery, but this stuff is available in the browser. It's going to be more performant. Paint, don't download. This is just sort of another tip, right? We have different APIs like Canvas and video and some WebGL and SVG. There's actually methods for embedding base64 encoded values, right? So instead of sending an image source to an actual image and making an HTTP request, you can just set a base64 encoded version of that. Browser doesn't cache it, but it's still very performant because you're saving your some bandwidth there. Some more stuff in JavaScript 1.6. So the array class has been sort of updated. We do this stuff in jQuery, iteration over for each, filtering, mapping certain values onto other values. Just some things to think about, right? There's a lot of sort of, when we cover HTML5, we say there's the spec, but there's also sort of HTML5++, which includes CSS and this sort of stuff. So HTML5 markup, more than just semantics. My clicker doesn't work. Yeah. So there's a couple of things you should be aware of in some of the semantics in HTML5. Two I just sort of realized myself are the rel. There's a couple new rel attributes. So the first is pingback, and the second is prefetch. Pingback, so say you have a blog, right? And it's a really popular blog, maybe the Chromium blog, maybe Google Code blog or something like that. And at the end of the blog, it lists all the other blogs that are linked into that blog. So one way that can be accomplished is using this anchor tag with the rel pingback, notifying that parent blog that that link is happening. Another example is prefetch. So a good use case here is, say, a web search, right? You know the user is probably going to click on the top link. It's most relevant. Might as well prefetch that page. Give the browser a hint in order to download that page and give them a little bit more speedy performance. Same thing with pagination using the prefetch on the href. I guess that should be a rel. It's a mistake in my slides. I apologize. HTML5 forms. How many have ever built a form in HTML5 and used jQuery or some JS validation? And it's just been ugly, ugly, ugly. I just want to show you. We covered some of this in the keynote, but I want to show you some other stuff in HTML5 forms. This is something I put together on the plane, just to show you how easy it is. We have a bunch of new attributes in the input tag. So the first thing, and sorry it's sort of off screen, and they just got a full screen. The first thing is new CSS selectors, right? So we have invalid properties. We have disabled and input. You can actually, based on the attribute, the required attribute, change the background color to light yellow, saying that this input value is required. So the key takeaway from this page, and I'll show you the rest of these, but there's no JavaScript on this page. So I can come in here, and this is being styled because it's a required field. And so once I start typing and the user's input some value, it's going to change the CSS selection, and therefore I don't have the red border anymore in my invalid state right here. Right, there's a search input, which is great, very similar to Apple's search. There's a range. How many times have we built these, using divs and whatnot on the web, using a library? This is all built in the browser. It's going to be native. It's going to be performant. Autofocus. When this page first loaded, the email box there has been autofocused. Like 90% of the JavaScript on the web today probably autofocuses as an input someplace on a page. Don't have to do that using JavaScript anymore. Again, color, there's date pickers, regex patterns for things like telephone numbers. That's pretty cool, right? Again, no JavaScript. Two or three that I actually forgot about myself are the two at the bottom here, the meter tag and the progress tag. So again, this is stuff we've implemented in libraries, UI libraries, but this is something that is now available in browsers. And WebKit in particular is getting pretty good at supporting a lot of these. So for instance, the meter here is, there's a max value of 100 and there's a value of 30, so you can see it's set appropriately. If the browser doesn't support this particular input type, this meter tag, it's just going to have literally 30% showing. So you still can have a fallback case for compatibility. Talk a little bit about web storage. So web storage is great because we can finally take our applications offline, right? We're sort of in this mobile society now. We have mobile phones, we have mobile devices, we have laptops. You're going to want to be able to access your data anywhere, anytime. And so web storage is really going to help with that. But it's really more than just taking your apps offline. It's also going to be for performance. So say you have a Twitter application or something. Might as well cache the first 25 tweets every time the user loads your app in the WebSQL database or something similar, an IndexedDB, instead of querying a server each time. So there's three key options right now, and these were sort of discussed before, but local storage is the first. It's really simple. There's just key value pairs. So the first example, I set my date of birth just as a string and store it in the local